it was easy to tell funny stories at first because then kids expect funny all the time. And then you can tell a funny story, but you can hook in some life lessons. Many kids out there who are struggling and, their classmates would never know. We try our best to make sure when kids are in the room, everyone feels like they belong and they feel equal. But that can weigh on a teacher quite a bit, as you can tell by the breaking of my voice.
Hi, everyone. I'm your host, Dr. Shafer of Talks with Dr. Shafer. I'm a physician, mom, author, publisher, and I'm passionate about helping others reclaim their stories and build their most beautiful future. Here on the show, every week we share inspiring stories of people who are doing just that. And this week we have an inspiring guest who is sharing the stories of his students and the lessons he's learned from them. Matt Eicheldinger is the New York Times best-selling author of 5 books, with many more coming soon. His books include the middle grade Matt Sprouts series, Sticky Notes, Holes in My Underwear, over 100 poems that will knock your socks off. Matt has also started a social media movement for connecting with kids through his Sticky Notes stories, with many, many millions of views of stories from his life and from his time as a 6th grade teacher and the lessons he learned from his students. An inspiring, passion-led author, Matt Eicheldinger is making the world a better and more understanding place, one story at a time. Matt, thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Absolutely. I think I need to hire you for future introductions. That was that was pretty stellar. I hope I live up to the description there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I am so excited to have you on the show and to share what you are doing with our listeners. I imagine many of them have already come across you on their social media feeds or in their bookstore, but I think that's kind of the magic. I always say I have a tagline in my show, stop doom scrolling, listen to a podcast, but I actually love doom scrolling, and in general, my feed is lovely. My social feed is lovely, and I come across people like yourself that are genuinely putting out their positive content, and it's fantastic to see, and I just appreciate you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, it's nice to carve out a little space of the internet that is positive and uplifting. My feed is not like yours. My feed is a mix of all different things. So I'm glad to hear that some people's feed is only positive.
It genuinely is. I don't know how I did that. Maybe it's by having amazing people like you on the show and promoting them and finding the people that find them. I don't know, but I'm
Yeah.
going to try to keep it going. Now,
Okay.
you didn't always think that you were going to be a teacher and an author. You started off thinking that you would become an architect. How did you come to changing into the field of education? So many of our listeners are so interested either earlier in life or in midlife and how to really lean into pivoting.
Yeah, I talk about pivoting a lot. The architectural pivot was pretty early. I was 18, and so I hadn't chosen my college yet, but I told my parents I was going to be an architect. I figured they made a lot of money, so that's what you're supposed to do is you go follow the money, and I could draw halfway decent. So my parents even bought me like my first computer. We were looking at colleges, and then that summer, excuse me, before going to college, I was a part of a soccer camp. Our high school led a soccer camp for like elementary and middle school students. And my coach always put me with what we call the bumblebees, which is like the pre-K kindergarten kids, because no one else could handle it, I guess. I don't know, but I always enjoyed it. And so we were doing that soccer camp, and I was like, you know what? I've always enjoyed doing this. This is like a highlight of my summer. Maybe I should be working with kids. And so I pivoted that summer real quick and decided I would become a teacher. Neither of my parents were teachers. No one in my extended family was a teacher, but it just felt like a very natural fit.
I think it's so important to embrace the pivot. And I think sometimes, especially when we're following, like you mentioned, maybe money or notoriety, what our parents
Yeah.
want us to do, whatever it is, expectations of ourselves or others, it's easy to fall into, I'm going to get this degree. I'm going to do this
Yep.
job. Yeah, it's so easy. And I think it's important for kids to understand that because you said something one day, or even for us as adults, right? Just because you said you were going to do something one day or 1 year doesn't mean it's what you're going to do forever. You're allowed to grow out of that dream and out of that position.
Yeah, I talk with students and adults too about transferable skills, right? So I was a teacher for 15 years. I didn't go to school to be an author, but so much of what I did in the classroom actually works really well with being an author. I don't know what skills an architect has to go into teaching, but I'm sure there are some. But yeah, everyone's got transferable skills, but sometimes you don't see them until you really take the leap and you're like, oh yeah, I can do this.
I love that. So I volunteer some seasons as a ski patroller in Boyne
Okay.
Highlands in northern Michigan, right? I know exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. I've got my certificate back here somewhere because I'm very, very proud of that. And, but it's funny because when I'm with this specific group of people, I think that's an interesting thing to focus on too. And as teachers, I think you see that so crystalline how we are different people. We're different versions of ourselves with different people. And when I am with my fellow ski patrollers, the very common feedback that I'll get from them is, why weren't you a kindergarten teacher? Like what happened along the way? You missed your calling. But I try to explain, listen, being a doctor is being a teacher. Literally, the Latin of doctor means to be a teacher.
Oh,
And
okay.
we all need to be held and cared for like a young child when we're told something really difficult. And when you're a neurologist, you're often dealing with, very difficult diagnoses. So I
Yeah.
love this thought of these transferable skills. Or when you're a ski patroller and you are going up to someone who 5 seconds ago was a big bad A because they were doing flips and tricks, and now they're in a very different position
Yeah.
and they need someone to just care for them and to model that empathy and help them through that. So those skills are so transferable. Now, how did you, when you were teaching, come to the point where you decided that you didn't want to just share stories to help kids in your class, but then also you wanted to put that in book form, like this beautiful book I have here, Sticky Notes?
Ooh, there was no plan. I would consider it a happy accident. So in the middle of the pandemic, I self-published my first middle grade novel. It was a dream that I'd had for a very long time. It just wasn't panning out. I would send letters to New York, rejection after rejection. So I made it myself and then spent a couple of years just kind of learning what it's like to be an author, self-published author, hustling your book, trying to get it into stores and having your own website. All that was so new. And I was lucky enough to where that book had enough success, I was able to secure a literary agent, which I'd been trying to do for a really long time. And once I got that agent, we were able to secure a book deal to re-release that book with a large publisher. And that book jumped right away to the New York Times best-selling list. And then it was like, hey, Matt, what else do you write? And I was like, well, I don't know yet. I just started. And Sticky Notes really didn't begin with like a book pitch. It started with when that first book, before it was a New York Times bestseller, I figured I should start social media because I needed a way to promote, right? But I didn't want to do what I'd seen on social media before. I didn't want to dance. I didn't want to, sing, or I had no talents that seemed repeatable. And I didn't want to put in daily effort of hours of trying to like vie for people's attention. So I was like, well, I guess I'll do what I've always done, which is to tell stories. And so those stories that I'd saved from my classroom were easy to tell, but they were also fulfilling for me to retell as well because I'd never really reflected on them. And I was lucky enough to where those stories resonated online. And so once my following grew, I pitched the idea to my publisher. I was like, I want to make a book that's full of stories, but like really short stories, not chapters, just like I think there are like 200 to 300 words at most each story. I just wanted to get at the heart of what the message was from the lesson that I learned from those kids.
Yeah. Do you mind if I share a quote from, I don't know if your publisher will be mad at us, but there's a
I don't
quote I
think
really wanted to share from your
I.
introduction.
Oh yeah, go for it. I don't think they'll be mad. I mean, this is basically a promotion, so so yeah, go
And this
for
is
it.
the best thing to promote, absolutely.
Well, thank you.
So the the introduction really touched me, and it goes back to what you were just discussing, the why, right? Because you can write a book. Anyone can write a book, but if you don't know your why, and if you're not really centered in your why, all the promotion in the world, it's not going to have an impact. Whereas you really started
Right.
with impact.
Yeah.
And when you think about stories, because again, we can tell stories, but it's so important for us to have done that reflection on them so that when we share them more fully. And that really only comes with time and
Yeah.
allowing those experiences to grow. And so to quote you from your introduction about the importance of every single story that you share, you reflected on going back to the stories. You had written them in yearbooks and on sticky
Hmm.
notes and all these different places. And you noted that, quote, I expected to find exactly what I wrote down, a funny quote here, a story of friendship there, but instead I discovered something more. There and all those memories were lessons.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess, you know, when I originally wrote them down, just like you said, they were meant to be reflected on when I was done teaching, my retirement party, like something like that, where I could look back and be like, wow, look at my long career I had with all these kids. Um, but as you grow as a person and mature and as an adult, you start to look at things differently. And so when I started looking at them for the first time again, it was strange how easily some of those lessons popped up. I think if I would have had a shorter teaching career, maybe 3 or 4 years, and looked back at those memories, I don't know that I would have seen the same insights that I do now. So time definitely played a huge role with that book. That book couldn't have been written as a first year or second year teacher, for me at least.
I think that's important for our listeners. And if they have children or are supporting children or students in their lives, important for us to pass along that message as well, because it's really easy. And we talked about really beautiful things about social media, like finding your
Hmm.
channel, right? And listening to these great messages. But I think it's also really easy. I've seen you do an interview where you were sitting with a stack of books and it was, okay, well, these are the books I have. And then these are the ones that are coming out next year. And that is work that you've been doing, as I understand it, even before the pandemic. These are stories that have been percolating and you've written and made pictures and drawings and written them down for over a decade. This didn't happen overnight. And I think that's such a valuable lesson to share, and you sharing the experience of all the work that went into getting there, because it's so valuable to talk about those transferable skills, to teach not what are we going after, but what are the steps, the discipline, the habits that we develop to get us from point A to point Z and all the steps along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I wrote that first book I wrote when I was 21, and I often think like if for some weird reason it had the same success, right? Very big hypothetical, but let's say I'm 21, I pitched the book and it does the exact same thing as it did now. There's no way I would have been ready for any attention or any I wouldn't even have any more ideas at that point. Um, so it's tough when people ask like, how do you follow a dream? You did it. How can I do that? And one of the hardest things to tell people is like you have to be really patient. And I know that's frustrating as someone who waited 15 years for their moment of trying every single day. But I do think the time is worth it. It really is.
Yeah. And zooming in on a word you used, patience, that's something that really comes across when you share these stories, and something that I think is a unique frustration for teachers, also for therapists, for people who support people in their
Yeah.
lives in ways that they don't have the power to fix the problem, but finding out ways that they can support the person and help them learn tools to help them with whatever challenge it is they're facing. And that requires so much patience. And as I read these stories of the struggles, the real life struggles your students had over the years being in your classroom, and what it must have been like to go to school every day, it would have been really easy in my mind to get lost in feeling of sorrow and overwhelm. And you figured out how to show up for each individual student. And I want to ask, is that a patience that you had when you started teaching, or is that something that you learned, another lesson from your students over the years?
It's a really good question. I don't think I've been asked that before. Um, I think there's a couple factors. One is I was lucky enough to have mentor teachers. I've traveled more in the last year and a half than I have in my entire life, doing author visits and meeting with educational companies and conferences. And I've learned that having a mentor teacher is not normal, I would say. I was very lucky to have a group of teachers in my building that kind of took me under their wing, and I learned a lot from them, a lot about what it's like to meet with families that disagree with you, what it's like to meet with kids who don't want to be there. But I think the bigger backbone to how I approach teaching definitely comes from my family. I talk about this not in the book, but I've shared a few stories online. My mom owned a dance studio. It was one of the only dance studios in Western Colorado at the time. And so kids would travel from somewhere up to 2 hours away just to come take dance class. So it was very popular in our small town. And one of the classes my mom taught, well, she taught all of them, by the way. So she taught every single dance class from like 8 until whenever. But one of the dance classes was called New Rhythms, and it was for kids with special needs. So kids who might have developmental delays, kids who couldn't hear or see. And I would help with that class. And so I really got a firm understanding of what it's like to help others find joy, especially from a kid's from my perspective. It seemed at first like these kids, they can't dance or they can't find happiness here. So that was huge. And at the same time, my dad managed a company. It was like a mass production factory. But there was this break room, and he would have, I think the program was called Rainbows. And these adults with special needs would come in, and they would make boxes and learn about teamwork and what it's like to work in a factory. Many of them wouldn't be able to do that otherwise. And so I was constantly exposed to this idea of like patience, understanding, empathy. And so when I got to have my classroom for the first time, it seemed very natural to try and take things slow, right? To get to know people and not try and react out of habit or impulse. But even with all of that background, it's still very hard as a teacher to not want to put out all the fires, as we say. You're the only adult in the room, so oftentimes you feel that if you don't act quickly, the problem will get larger or it'll get out of control. And so something I had to learn over time was just to slow down. And that took years. That took a lot of years.
I so appreciate you sharing those experiences, because it really comes through in the work you do and how you share students' stories. And I think there's something really interesting also about the way you share these stories that I wonder if it may be the magic sauce. Oh, we have balloons now. My computer was so excited. Yeah, maybe like the magic sauce that took these from individual stories that happened between you and a person or you in a classroom to something that has really impacted the world and inspired so many people. The way you share the stories, instead of sharing them from more of a first person point of view, you are third person sharing the story of someone else often. And I've heard you speak on how the way of packaging it that way has really allowed listeners and readers to meet you where you are and then share their stories without feeling like, perhaps it is without feeling like they're taking the mic or they're one-upping you. It just gives them space to share their stories. And it makes me think even more about the power of teaching. When you, as a teacher, you can't just stand in front of the class and say, these are the things I want you to learn. And by the way, most of them are not core math. They're more life skills. They're more critical thinking skills. Yeah. You can't just teach those. You share stories, you read books, you understand what this character did. What are there favorite stories that you shared in your 6th grade classroom that you think uniquely did that, allowed you to connect with students and teach them those really big lessons that you hoped they would take with them when they graduated out of your classroom?
Well, sure. So I guess rewinding a bit, the way in which I tell stories, I try and remove myself from it, because the story ultimately is not about me, right? Like I'm there, so I do I have to acknowledge that I was present and how I responded, but I'm not the focal point of the story. And it's the same thing in the classroom. Like, yes, I'm standing in front of kids and I'm, sometimes delivering, knowledge, but most of the time I'm just facilitating. And so I present what we're doing. I give students different avenues to approach it, and then I assist kids when they need help. And so, when I think of building a story, it's very much in the same way of dialing it back and making sure that the story is accessible for everybody, regardless of your background. So the stories that I would tell in my classroom are much different than the ones that I told in that book and on social media. I rarely would talk about other students that I'd had in front of my current students, just because it was easier for them to probably discover who it was. But I did share stories all the time. I had a story jar in my classroom filled with all these embarrassing moments from my childhood. It was kind of like my, for lack of a better term, like carrot on the end of the stick, right? If we reach a goal or accomplish a task, I would tell these silly stories. However, over time, I started putting in stories from my childhood that did have lessons, just like the ones in that book. And fun fact, there's going to be a sequel to that book that's just for kids. It's stories from my childhood. And so, it was easy to tell funny stories at first because then kids expect funny all the time. And then you can tell a funny story, but you can hook in some life lessons. A story that I love telling, and it's actually in one of my middle grade novels, is this moment with my dad where I'm in the backyard. He had just yelled at me to finish chores, and my dad never yelled, so I was like feeling very guilty. But I exaggerated in front of my students, and they think it's funny. And then, in the story, I run outside and I have to shovel all of our dog poop because we lived in the country. And then I went to throw it in the burn pile, but instead I threw it over the fence at this llama, right? The llama jumps the fence and it chases and tramples me. And the students loved it. They think it's hilarious, right? And I end up hurting myself pretty bad. I break a toe. But that's not the point of the story, right? So I've got the kids hooked with humor. And then that evening, I'm laying in bed, and the typical routine is my mom, until I was like 18, would always come say goodnight. She would just peek her head and say goodnight. And that evening, it was my father, and he walked in and sat on the edge of my bed. He didn't even look at me. He just kind of patted me on the leg, and he goes, "A father should never yell at his son. I'm really sorry." And he left. And for me, I was like, oh, that's what strength looks like. You know what I mean? Like, I'd always viewed my dad as like this really muscular guy, and he still is. Dad, if you're listening, you could probably still tackle me and wrestle me down. But that was a moment for me where I was like, oh, okay, this is what it's like to be a father. This is what it's like to be a man. You can have strength in both humility and strength in masculinity. So that's a story that I usually start the year with, and the kids get hooked right away. It's an emotional roller coaster.
It is. And it's such an important lesson because I think, especially in that middle grade time, kids are learning they do have power and how to yield that power and which way to lean into, right? Are we going to be good or bad? Am I going to be in this group or in that group? And I think when we share these stories as adults, as important adults in kids' lives that depict us as maybe making bad choices and growing, that's really important because it allows kids to try that character on and also to have grace for themselves for just because I did something bad or just because my circumstances are what I would like them to be, like what Billy has or what Sally has, doesn't make me a bad kid and it doesn't predict how I'm going to behave. Like, I have autonomy. I can make choices.
Yeah, a phrase that I got from, I think it's a pretty common phrase, but I heard it my third or fourth year teaching. I think one of my colleagues said, "Oh, middle school's all about trying on different hats, and every kid just has a bin of hats at their house, and they come and they wear a hat, and they're like, am I going to be the funny kid today? Am I going to be the leader today?" And they're trying to figure out which hat fits them best. And so it's not my job as a teacher to tell you what hat to wear, right? Everybody's unique. It's my job to show you, like, hey, when you wore that hat, here's what I noticed. That's all. And kids will make the decisions for themselves. And sometimes you try and aim kids, You're like, hey, I liked that hat you wore yesterday. That was a great hat. But for the most part, you really just want to show them all the different doors and opportunities that are in front of them and then let them make decisions.
Yeah, and ask them, how did that feel? Right? So
Yeah.
instead of it being,
Yeah.
what does, you know, what does Mr. Matt or Mr. Ike say or think about me? But
Right.
what do I think about me when I show up differently?
Yeah. And I think that's hard for kids to understand too. Like you said, autonomy. Like we want you to figure out who you are. That's what growing up's all about. But I think that's particularly hard today when kids have so many options of how to present themselves. So now you have social media. You can present yourself however you want. Um, and I think that makes things, I think it takes longer for kids to figure out who they are. It becomes a little murky.
Yeah. My daughter has a social media account because I manage it because she's an author and she has
Okay.
3 books out and she has a 4th coming out next year. And with every book, so her passion is to encourage other kids to write, which I know you know the importance of, to share their
Yeah.
stories, but also to raise money for different charities, pardon
Oh,
me, which
cool.
is what she's done with all of her books. So she needs to, just like you were kind of in, those years ago, oh, I got to get on social media because I need to get out to the world. She had to be out there. I manage it 100%. She doesn't go on Instagram. She doesn't look at it because
Okay.
no,
Yeah.
absolutely not. We discuss if someone comments something really nice, we'll have a discussion about, oh, here's this feedback, but I wouldn't even go into the likes and the comments because it really concerns me about how it impacts a child when they're still developing a sense of self and they don't necessarily have the resilience that we have as adults when we dive into the waters of social media.
Yeah. Yep. It's a difficult path, that's for sure.
Yeah, we're all navigating it the best we can. Now,
Yeah.
early in the book, you share a story, and it's KJ's story, which I
Mm,
really love because it
that's one
brings
of my
into
favorites too.
question. Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
I love it because, a lot of these stories, I had to stop reading this morning because I was like, I'm going to be taping and my eyes are going to be the size of walnuts because they'll be so puffy from crying. I need to stop reading right now. But I think one of the nice thing about KJ's story is it pulls your heart in a different way. And it just gives you this idea of potential. And so it really brought into question, as you were just talking about, this idea of belonging. Many of us are in different stages of our lives feeling like we don't belong. And KJ was struggling with that. He was in your class and he was a deterrent to learning or a distraction from learning, the way he was showing up, the hat he was wearing, as you said. And it was who he
Yeah.
was. He couldn't take this hat off. It's just his energy level was
Yep.
high and he had a hard time directing it from what you share in the story. But then you go on a hike with the students and he becomes the hero because they didn't have that high energy. They were struggling and he could use his gifts, his talents in a way that he could actually show up to be not the detriment to the class, but the person that was pulling the class along. And I just thought that was really cool and a testament how, we often see ourselves as the problem. And an example I like to use with my kids is, you don't get upset with a flower if it's struggling and you don't say it's the flower's problem. You say, what's going on in the environment?
Yeah.
What can we do to better support the flower? And so I love this example of changing the environment to help a kid succeed.
Yeah. And in our school, we were lucky enough to go on a pretty big field trip to northern Minnesota for a week. And we would do it the first few times we did it like early in September and October. And so you got to know kids really well in a short amount of time because you saw them in a completely different environment. And another thing that helped me too as a understand this lesson is as my students graduated, right? So this is now year 7, 8 of my teaching career. You got to see the profession that kids chose or the path that they took. And then in hindsight, you could be like, oh, that makes complete sense, and so that provides a new lens when you get students in your classroom. You're like, okay, I remember I had a student who had similar qualities to you. I just do this in my mind. I know that they ended up being okay. So I can figure this out with you. Yeah, it's special to watch kids shine in a new way when you don't expect it as well. And KJ's story I've reposted that story online multiple times because it is one of my favorites. And the story never does as well as I think. Like the metrics of it, of the shares and the likes, are never that great compared to the other stories I tell. But to me, I can feel KJ's energy in the room and how disruptive it was. And then I can still remember smiling as he bounced around all these different kids, encouraging them to keep hiking. You can do it. Oh my gosh, Mr. Ike, I think we're going to make it. Like, it was just such a clear example of what you can do when you are in a different environment, and when the skill set that you have is transferable, like we talked about earlier.
I love that. And it makes me think of, if you have what we say, flippantly, tips or tricks for teachers or parents when, you're in this situation, so that you can connect with kids, connect with middle schoolers, because we know it's just a tricky time in development. I wouldn't go back to middle school if you paid me. I wouldn't. You couldn't pay me enough money. So are there ways that you've learned to see children's skills, to learn how to connect with them, rather than, I'm big on connection rather than correction?
Yeah.
Are there ways to hack into that and connect with kids, rather than making them wall themselves off because they feel that they're always wrong or that they don't belong?
Yes, there's a few things I would do. And I'd preface this by saying, like, these are things I would do in a classroom setting. I have 2 middle schoolers right now, and it can be a moving target as a father. And my wife would say the same thing. But in the classroom, something that I started doing, and this sounds so silly, but it worked, is I started circle time, just like kindergarten, where like you sit down and there's not really a finite agenda. So every Monday, I would have 5 sections of language arts, which meant I saw anywhere from 120 to 150 kids each day. It's a lot of kids. And on Monday, when kids came in, we would sit in a circle, either in chairs or on the ground, and I would have 4 questions up on the board that had nothing to do with education. Maybe pop culture, what's better, ice cream, or some other treat, just really random topics. And then the last question was, what'd you do this weekend, or anything else you want to share? And we just go around the circle. You can pass if you want. You don't have to talk, but we go around twice. And students know that we will go around twice. So whether it takes 5 minutes or 35 minutes, everyone's going to get the opportunity. And the first time you do it, kids aren't as apt to share in detail. They'll just answer a question with a short phrase. That's fine. They're getting their voice heard. Everyone's listening. And what I have found is that by giving kids that time on a Monday, it pays dividends the rest of the week. Not only do I have good background knowledge on you, new background, you gave me more data on Monday about how you're doing or what you did that weekend, or insights into the hobby you like. Not only do I have more data, but you also kind of got it out of your system, the things that you wanted to share. So then the rest of the week is more productive. And then something else I had to learn too, and I kind of already touched on this, is just slowing down. You have to slow down. And you can apply this to any job, I think. But with teaching, I always felt this need to keep pace with my colleagues, right? So I taught 6th grade language arts. There were 4 other teachers who taught 6th grade language arts. And I always felt like if they were ahead of me in the curriculum, that I somehow wasn't an adequate teacher, right? But what I found is that when I went at my pace, I was less stressed and therefore could show up my better self to my students. And I know there's data of like, you need to do what's in the best interest of pacing for the kids. And I certainly take that into consideration. I'm not going to show up to class and be like, Mr. Eicheldinger is feeling really low on energy today, therefore we will all go low. It doesn't work that way. There are deadlines and timelines you need to hit. But when you can slow down and let your authentic self come forward, then kids see you for your authentic self. And then you can form a real connection.
Yeah, I think when we're under stress and pressure, it works for making diamonds, but it doesn't necessarily work for, in the moment, creating the best connection and the best
Right.
moment. So taking a pause. And for me as a parent, those moments where you literally almost feel, I don't know if you've ever had this experience, when things are going sideways and you feel that pressure in your chest because,
Yeah.
oh man, we got to get out the door. We got to do this thing, or, oh, this is really going sideways. I feel it can be really tempting to dive into it, but nothing ever good happened there. You got to, like you said, like suspend time,
Yeah.
take a break.
Yeah. Yeah. So those are my two pieces of advice. If you are a teacher, do some circle time with your kids. Just get to know them. Play a board game. Have a day where there is no lesson and they can just play games and you can sit with them. And I can hear the people on the other side of the fence being like, oh, you should be teaching them. And I argue, well, I'm gathering data and that data is going to feed me the rest of the year and it's going to help me better assist my students. So go play a game.
I love it. I think we've really moved away from playing games. I love those card games. And you as an author, I think that should be actually maybe the next thing. So there should be a sticky notes little deck of cards that are
Yeah.
conversation starters. And they actually look like sticky notes. So,
Ooh, that's not a bad idea.
Andrews McMeel Publishing, you heard it here first. I'm waiting to see them. We'll buy them. We'll use them in our home because I love this. It's not just for circle time. It's for sitting down at the dinner table. One of the things we like to do, like you said, kind of getting something off of our chest. We like to ask, what are the things we loved that happened this week? And then what are things that went really wrong? And what did we learn from them? And once we can speak it, we can move on from it. So I love giving them a safe space to say what they need to say and move forward.
Yeah. Excuse me. And that's so much better than, the standard, like, how was your day? You're not going to get any good info there. You have to be more specific. What was something funny that happened? Or thorns and roses, like you said. What was something that was hard? Something that was beautiful? Yeah, I agree.
Exactly. Otherwise you get a lot of, I don't remember.
Yeah.
I don't remember. I'm hungry. What's for dinner? That's pretty much what you're going to hear.
Yes, we hear that in our house too.
But we are definitely reading sticky notes in our home and leaving space for the questions, like you said, and the problem solving suggestions from the kids as we go through the stories. And I'm really excited to hear that there's going to be a book that's more targeted towards kids. I think this is definitely accessible, but I think it's really exciting when you make something exactly for your audience, because obviously it will land even better.
I didn't have plans for a book for like a sequel for kids. It was people who had bought the book were sending me messages online and they're like, so I like your book, but I can't get it away from my kid. Have you thought of making another one? And so this was like the first project that I ever like really interacted with people who follow me and who have bought the book, because I wanted to learn more. I'm like, well, why do the kids like it? And some people are like, I don't know. They're like, but you should think about it. But some people were telling me like because they're so short and digestible, it's really accessible for kids in this version because it's relatable. Like most of the stories that kids are reading about, they're like, oh my gosh, I had a friend that happened to me, or it happened to them. And because it's in a school setting, it's an easy, accessible story because it's universal almost for them. So I'm excited to kind of dive into my own childhood and show stories from when I grew up and the lessons that I learned. It should be a good time.
I am so excited for that. And it's such an important thing also because a lot of these stories maybe kids haven't experienced, or maybe they've seen them from afar, but they haven't really walked in those shoes before. And I think middle school is not only a time for putting on your own hat, but kids are tending to be in bigger classes. They're tending to be with people who are from all walks of life. They don't necessarily live in the same neighborhood that this child lives in. They don't have the same family system that they have. They have a lot of questions. So learning about this in a digestible way, you're so intentional with your language. And I think that is the sign of a truly excellent teacher and author, when you're extremely intentional with your language and you're not trying to put on a show, you're trying to get the information to the people in a way that is the most impactful.
Thank you. That was a very kind compliment. I appreciate it.
It's true. It's true. And I love it. And by the way, it's different in the book than the way you do it on social media, because those are different avenues. And so to
Yeah.
be able to do both so expertly is really special. So everybody make sure you get sticky notes, and then do we have a title yet for the children's version or not yet?
I think it's a pretty basic working title, which is Sticky Notes for Kids. But we're working. I think we'll work on a better subtitle.
Well, I think again, on the nose for kids, that ain't bad, right? That's what we'd say.
No. Yeah, not too shabby.
Not too shabby.
Yeah.
Before we tie things up for the end of the episode, I did want to talk about one other story that you told, because a lot of kids are struggling. A lot of kids are going through a lot, and they don't necessarily have a home life that's meeting their needs. Right. And so one of the stories that you shared that I think is so important for us to remember was the story of silly bands.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And can be a home for school. A school can be a home for kids, not just school.
Yeah. So that story, for people who don't know, is we had a student who came to school, and we learned over a short period of time that the student didn't really have much at home. And so we created a care backpack. We put all these things in there, and we put silly bands in there as well. And this kid would wear these silly bands. And if you're not familiar with silly bands, it's a rubber band, but shaped like an object. They used to be collectible. Kids would wear so many of them that they would cut the circulation off to their fingers. It was a big trend for a while. And this girl would wear them up to her darn elbows. And she said, I think the exact quote was something like, well, I can leave them here at home, right? And I was like, you mean take them home? She's like, well, no, I'm here more than any other place. This is my home. And you forget sometimes what kids go through. I remember the first time I had to call Child Protective Services, and it was like a very sobering moment of like, oh, if I don't call, this kid is going to have it really rough tonight. And that's this weight that many people that are in healthcare, teaching, working with other people, it's this invisible weight that you carry. And I'm very thankful when we have the opportunity to help. But yeah, there are many kids out there who are struggling, and their classmates would never know. We try our best to make sure when kids are in the room, everyone feels like they belong and they feel equal. But that can weigh on a teacher quite a bit, as you can tell by the breaking of my voice. Yeah, it gets tough. Yeah.
I have so much respect for your profession, for what you do, and for how you're sharing these stories and taking the impact out of the classroom and sharing it. And I'm sure that there are many sixth grade teachers who have this book and are sharing it. And now we'll have the children's version and sharing those stories again to bring those stories home for kids as they're learning not only who they want to be, but how they want to show up for one another in life. That's such a big part of middle school, and the work you do, the writing you do, and the social media presence you have, the bright light in somewhat of a dark sphere of the internet is so important for being the change in the world in one person's story and beyond that you want to be. So I thank you for the perspective you bring. And of course, all of your fellow teachers that are providing that environment for children across the country. I simply can't thank you enough.
Thank you. I'll shout out to teachers. Go teachers.
They're amazing. They truly, truly are. And I love all of your amazing books. We really spoke mostly about sticky notes today because as a health and wellness focused podcast, I think this is just a radiant book and a great way to start conversations with others, as well as to start you on a mindfulness path of healing and perspective. So, but That's not all. You have many, many other books. Can you share with our listeners the other books that they can get, as well as who they'd be good for? It is the holiday season, so people are picking presents. And goodness, I would love for people to be putting books
Yes,
on their
books are a great
lists.
gift. So I'll give you a quick rundown. So I've got the Matt Sprouts series, which is for middle grade readers. Even though it is a male protagonist, when I do school visits, his little assistant shouldn't. Well, she is little by statue, but Grace is just as big of a character. So male and female protagonist is great. I've got Sticky Notes, which we just talked about. I have a book called Holes in My Underwear, which is illustrated poetry. It's great for elementary through middle school. It also kind of dual serves as a coloring book, which is kind of cool. The books I have coming out are many. The ones that you'll hear about soon are my first YA trilogy, which comes out in March. First book is called When the Rain Came. It is very different than my middle grade series because it's a dystopian world. However, if you like what I share online, the through message of the trilogy is what is family? And so I try my best to incorporate lessons as this world is seemingly crumbling. But it's my longest story to date, and I'm very proud of it. After the trilogy, I've got early readers coming out with Simon & Schuster called Marv and Baby Blob. They're two little monsters that I had to draw, and they help each other out. So it's weird to write both the dystopian trilogy and also cute little monsters. And then hopefully more books coming, but those I can't announce yet. But yeah, those are all my books so far.
That's so exciting. And I love, when you're an author, when you wear many hats, it is kind of nice to just block it off and say, okay, I'm going to spend time with these guys and then I'm going to go into here. It's nice to take a break sometimes.
Yeah, it is. Yes, it is. Yep. Sometimes I need a break from my own mind, which is why this podcast is great. So I can actually speak outside my brain.
Well, it's been beautiful to share your thoughts and the lessons. And I'm sure that our storytellers, which is what we call our audience, will be so just the better for it. So what's coming out recently, I'll say recently because we're taping it this week, but it's going to come out in a few weeks, is for good, wicked for good, right? And we talk about how the people in our lives change us. And I think it can be easy when we get stuck in the performance mode, like you said about, okay, I have to get through my lesson plan. It's easy to forget how much opportunity we have to impact the people around us, whether it's walking down the street, in our classrooms, in our homes, with our kids. And so I think slowing down, showing the value of each story is so important. That's exactly what you do with your work. And I'm so appreciative you're here to share it with listeners.
Thank you. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to chat about it.
Matt, where can people, we talked about your books, where can people best connect with you to get the stories that you tell every day on social media?
Sure. I'm an easy guy to find with the last name Eicheldinger. There's not a lot of us. So if you Google my name, you'll find me. Otherwise, you can find me on socials at Matt Eicheldinger. And then my website is matteicheldinger.com.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Matt. It's been beautiful to have you on the show. Thank you for the lives you're changing and the work you're doing. We can't wait to check out all of your books. And we have 4 kiddos in our house, and I'm sure they're excited to read everything that's coming out next year, too. We'll have a big reading pile, big TBR.
Sweet. Thank you so much.
And we want to thank you, storytellers, for being here on the show. We appreciate your time and would love to hear your takeaways from this week's show. Please share with someone who would love this discussion too. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Talks with Dr. Shafer where you enjoy podcasts so that you don't miss any of the inspiring episodes we have coming up. Until next time, stay safe and take care. I'll talk to you soon.